Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, San Diego's at the center of an alleged international bribery scheme involving the military. And we'll tell you why some parents are delaying getting their children fully vaccinated before they start kindergarten.
And the City Council settles a decades-old zoning issue between shipbuilding companies and residents in Barrio Logan. What happens next and why voters may have the final word. Then our in-depth look at Homeland Security's new report on use of force by Customs and Border Patrol officers. What both sides agree on. I'm Peggy Pico with those stories just ahead.
And look at here, a $50 million cleanup project for San Diego Bay, one step closer tonight to reality. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Federal prosecutors here in San Diego say they have uncovered a bribery scheme involving hundreds of millions of dollars in defense contracts. It's connected to a company that services U.S. Navy ships at international ports. A Navy commander, a naval criminal investigator, and the president of a Singapore-based defense contractor were all arrested this week on bribery charges. If convicted, each man faces up to 5 years in prison. For the first time in more than 30 years, San Diego's Barrio Logan neighborhood, just south of downtown, has a community plan. KPBS Metro reporter Sandia Dirks has been following this story and joins us from the News Center with this update. Sandia, this is a big issue, obviously. Remind us who was there last night and what they had to say.
Well, there are really two sides in the issue, and both sides are represented. On one side, you have residents and environmental activists who say Barrio Logan has been for too long neglected and overrun with businesses who pollute the air and store toxic chemicals close to homes and schools in this primarily low-income Latino neighborhood. On the other side, you have maritime industry that says it needs businesses that serve the shipyards to be in close proximity in order to keep bringing jobs and money to the city. Over 5 years, these groups have worked together to come to an agreement on how to coexist in this very small strip of land that is Barrio Logan. And they managed to successfully compromise on almost everything except the makeup of a few blocks, which will form a buffer zone between residential homes and the port.
So what will eventually go into that buffer zone?
Well, after the City Council vote last night, it won't have schools, it won't have homes, and it won't allow heavy industry to set up shop. It will literally be a buffer with commercial industry. But the maritime industry says that is a huge impediment to perfectly safe companies developing there, because companies that go there will have to get something called a conditional use permit or a CUP. That means they will be regulated, and the shipbuilding industry that says that will cost money and time, and the community will, nix their plans altogether if they want to. They say this will limit their ability to do business with the Navy. They have said they are considering a referendum to overturn the council decision. But residents say claims that this will really dent business is a bit of an overstatement. They say what it will really do is protect people who live in Barrio Logan. And last night, 5 out of the 9 city council members agreed with the residents.
KPBS reporter Sandia Dirks. Now, as we just heard, a new community plan for Barrio Logan may settle a long-running dispute between industry and homeowners. Peggy Pico has more on the two sides.
Joining me are two people who spoke to the City Council about the new Barrio Logan community plan last night. Georgette Gomez with the Environmental Health Coalition, a backer of the plan that just passed, and Eric Buvold of National University's Institute for Policy Research, who wrote a report on the plan's potential economic impact on the maritime industry. Welcome.
Thank you.
Georgette, now your group has been working on air and environmental issues in the Barrio Logan for some time. What is the adoption of this plan do to address those issues?
Well, we are finally getting a plan that will create a zoning that separates all the uses, meaning residential, commercial, and the industrial. Currently, we have a plan that all of those uses are mixed. So this new plan that got adopted last night has separated those uses.
And specifically when it comes to health concerns that your group was looking into, proximity of homes next to shipyards and chemical storage areas, how would this plan address that situation?
Well, we currently have a plan, as I said, that it allows for industrial to be sited where the schools are at, where the multifamily is at. So we won't be, this new plan won't allow that anymore. We allocated a heavy industrial zone outside of the community. It's still part of the community boundaries, but it's away from where people live.
Where their houses are.
There are currently houses and commercial in that industrial zone, but the future there wouldn't be any housing nor commercial. It would be just industrial.
We're going to come back to that zone in just a minute, but I want to talk to you, Eric, about National University did a report on how this might impact the maritime community industry. What did you find out about the shipping industry as far as their concerns?
Sure. So we found in our report that there were 80 subcontractors to the big shipyards that are located in Barrio Logan. We found that even under the proposal that the industry supported, 22 of them would be in zones where they would be deemed incompatible, which meant over time there'd be encouragement for those businesses to leave. Really what we're talking about is...
Let's go with that. So why would they be encouraged to leave with the new zoning?
Yeah, that there's a restriction on how much that they could expand or redevelop their property. There's an expansion in terms of the uses. If a tenant leaves and is vacant for more than 2 years, there's a challenge for moving a new tenant into that facility if they're outside of a zone that allows for heavy industrial or maritime distribution uses.
And there's a cost, right? There's a cost associated with getting an environmental report.
Yeah, and this 8-block buffer area that's really the source of contention. The industrial businesses that would be there that would seek to do some sort of, moderate to medium-sized expansion would have to go through a conditional use permit process, and that's a pretty expensive process. It's all those expenses are on the applicant and probably runs a minimum of $100,000 for the costs that would be incurred from the lawyers and consultants and so forth.
So some people may say they can't afford it. So Georgette, I'm sure some maritime workers live in the Barrio Logan. They're of course concerned about keeping their jobs as well. What do they have to say, or how are you addressing these concerns that some businesses might be leaving?
Well, we strongly believe that this new plan that got adopted is not going to impact the working waterfront at all. That was the reason we created a buffer to protect the working waterfront by not allowing residential to be sited there anymore, which was one of the main concerns. Now we have another concern that there's maritime-oriented needs. We tried to come up with the criteria of those maritime-oriented businesses. The shipyards wouldn't want to agree to a criteria, so that's the reason we left it at having a conditional use permit. It's not ideal, but that's what we ended up with.
So you disagree, thinking that jobs won't move out. Now, I understand that some of the ship industry leaders say that they may pursue putting this issue before the voters in a referendum. I'll ask both of you this. I'll start with you, Eric. Do you think that would be successful?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that San Diegans have been concerned for a long time about a barbell economy or an inability to sort of grow the middle class for blue-collar jobs in manufacturing. And I think that the issue is probably framed really that way. I do think that's a problem. I don't think that necessarily community plan should go to referendum, but I think on this issue, I think that it's going to be pretty clear to the voters of where things stand.
And Georgette, are you concerned if it goes to the voters?
Not concerned at all. I mean, the fact that we were able to get the adoption yesterday shows that the community plan has no impacts on the shipyards at all.
All right, Georgette Gomez and Eric Buvald, thank you so much for this update. I want to let folks know they can see the National University report and the City Council information for last night on the new community plan on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, a 20-year debate over who will be responsible for cleaning up toxic sediments from San Diego Bay is a step closer tonight to being settled. The Port District has brokered a tentative agreement to pay a share of the $50 million dredging project. It's a picture-perfect view looking over San Diego Bay, just south of the Coronado Bridge. But lurking below the surface around the shipyards is decades of toxic materials from industrial waste and urban runoff. It's also contaminated sea life in the area where fishermen are often seen.
We're dealing with a bay and an urban environment that has been actively, a source of industrial operations and other urban activity for over 100 years.
Port Commissioner Rafael Castellano says
It's been a complicated process getting those most responsible for the contamination to agree to a cleanup. He says NASCO and BAE Systems have given tentative approval to spend $50 million to begin a deep cleaning or dredging of the area.
We understand, in fact, that NASCO is staging their equipment as we speak, so we hope that very, very soon we will have the work beginning and that it will be completed as soon as possible.
It's one of the most commercially important areas of the bay, right next to a military base. Cleaning it up won't solve all the problems, but will go a long way toward improving the situation.
And NASCO says the dredging work will begin once they secure all the funding. It could take up to 5 years to complete the toxic cleanup. Disgraced former mayor Bob Filner gave raises to 7 members of his staff before he resigned last month. An investigation by KPBS media partner 10 News found the salary increases totaled $86,000, with the largest amount going to Filner's press secretary. Interim Mayor Todd Gloria took away some of the raises, but let others stand.
I think the ones who are actually retaining all of the raises are people who are making $35,000 a year. These are people who are not getting wealthy doing public service. In other cases, we have an individual who's actually been asked to take on more duties, and as such, she will be paid a little bit more.
Now, Gloria says he doesn't know why Filner gave the raises. 6 of the 7 staffers will work for the city of San Diego. We are just 2 days away from the deadline to file nomination papers for the mayor's race. Candidates must turn in signatures of at least 200 registered voters or pay the $500 filing fee on Friday. More than 3 dozen people say they want to run in the special election to replace Filner, who resigned over claims of sexual harassment and other charges. That special election is set for November 19th. Emergency rooms in the state are seeing a surge in visitors. Researchers say Medi-Cal patients have played a big role in the increase. The study by UC San Francisco looked at ER visits between 2005 and 2010. It found a 13% increase overall, but visits by people on Medi-Cal increased by 35%. The report says the surge could reflect decreasing access to primary care, as a growing number of doctors don't accept Medi-Cal. Now, the news doesn't bode well for Obamacare, which will add even more people to the Medi-Cal rolls. The leader of San Diego's Catholic Diocese has officially stepped down. Bishop Robert Brahm is leaving his post after 24 years. Now, during his tenure, Brahm approved the second highest settlement in the U.S. for priest sexual abuse cases. He's succeeded by Bishop Cirilo Flores of Orange County. Catholic bishops are required to retire when they turn 75. More children than ever were not fully vaccinated in the county when they started kindergarten last year. It's part of a trend toward giving kids fewer vaccines at one time. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser says delaying vaccine is another sign of skepticism about their safety.
Doggy, what's he doing? Is he eating?
Carolyn Olstad sits in a grassy park across the street from her San Marcos home and watches her 2 young sons eat crackers and bury toys in a sandbox. Olstad isn't anti-vaccine, but wants to slightly delay shots for her young sons. So instead of getting multiple shots in one doctor's appointment, she spreads them out over several visits, paying the copay each time.
The last round that he got, he was kind of fussy and, I could tell his legs were really sore after and just from the shots. So for the next round, I'll probably have them spaced apart just because he didn't take this round so well.
Olstad says her sons will be finished with their shots by the time they start kindergarten in a few years. But other parents delay vaccines a lot more by following schedules that spread out doses over 8 or 10 years. That means more and more students don't have all their shots when they start kindergarten. Our media partner iNewsSource crunched the numbers and found that last year, nearly 90% of the schools in San Diego County had kindergarten classes with at least one student who was not up to date on vaccines. Delayed vaccination schedules mean children aren't fully protected when they start school, but that's not a worry for some parents.
At the end of the day, you have to weigh what's best for the individual child, for the individual family.
Toby Hayes was vaccinating his oldest daughter, but then she developed Asperger's syndrome. Hayes worries the vaccines gave his daughter her condition, so he decided not to start his other 5 kids' vaccines until they're 10 years old. He says he's not as worried about his kids getting diseases like whooping cough and measles that vaccines are meant to protect against. That's because those diseases don't feel completely real.
Most important of all is vaccination in the early years of life.
The generations before, they had neighbors, they had friends, that people who had diseases that are now curable with vaccines. But people in our generation don't see those on a regular basis, and so it's hard to have that visual impact of choosing not to be vaccinated.
Dr. Marianne Haskell, a pediatrician in Coronado, says individual children's needs should outweigh public health concerns.
I believe that medicine is very hard to do as a one-size-fits-all.
She says vaccines can be harmful for certain kids.
Almost all procedures in medicine and all medications and vaccines have a risk-to-benefit ratio, and you have to make the best decision for your family.
Shane Crotty, a scientist at La Jolla Institute of Allergy and Immunology, disagrees.
This idea of spreading out the vaccines being a good idea is, it's just a myth, and it's just one of these myths that's gotten passed around. Getting 5 vaccinations in a day is just a raindrop in the ocean of what your immune system deals with every single day.
He says having multiple unvaccinated kids at one school means disease outbreaks could spread quickly. Vaccines are not 100% effective, so if enough kids aren't vaccinated, even the protected children can get sick.
I tell people not getting vaccinated is like littering. If one person does it, it's not a big deal. And if everybody does it, it becomes a really big problem.
Some parents keep their children on the regular shot schedule. Anthony Wagner lives in San Diego with his wife and 2 kids who are fully vaccinated.
We leave it to the experts. We make as informed a decision as we can, and we rely on those experts to make good, well-informed, educated decisions.
Wagner does feel bad about making his kids get multiple shots at the same time.
Probably one of the hardest things that I had to do as a dad is hold my kid down while she looks at me and says, why are you doing this to me? Well, they give her a serum shot. That's hard to do, but the benefit of that far outweighs, the crying, as is well the risk.
His decision is even fine with his daughter Maeve, who's in kindergarten. She has bad memories from her last round of shots.
It really hurt and it was really painful.
Clearly coached by her dad, she makes his point for him. She gets shot, she says,
because we don't want the sickness from the sick people.
Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
Now, for more about the vaccination rate at your kid's school, go to our website, kpbs.org. Homeland Security has released a new report to address concerns over the use of force by Customs and Border agents. Peggy Pico has more on that.
The Inspector General's office report is a response to a number of deaths by Border Patrol agents, including the death of Anastasio Hernandez Rojas in San Diego. Here with details are Sean Moran, Vice President of the Border Patrol Union, and Mitra Ebadolai, Border Litigation Attorney with the ACLU. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mitra, this report indicates that Custom and Border Patrol, or CBP, does not have a system to track the use of force. Did that surprise you?
Yes, it's very disappointing. We can't know how big the problem is or what the nature of the problem is unless we have accurate and up-to-date statistics and information. And the report indicates that there's no system in place to track excessive use of force claims as such.
Well, Sean, how come there isn't such a system in place, or is there and the report just didn't see it?
We do have systems that show the use of less than lethal force by Border Patrol agents, but the way our use of force policy is, we do not have during a deadly force encounter, we do not have the agents make a report.
Well, who investigates complaints against the CBP or ICE officers?
Well, how much time do you have? Because depending on the jurisdiction, we have upwards of 5 plus agencies and entities within different agencies that will investigate any use of force.
Okay. So it's diversified, it sounds like.
It is, from the local or the state level, and then at the federal level within the Border Patrol and within DHS and CBP. There are multiple agencies and units that investigate these allegations.
Another finding was that border agents were not fully trained in all less than lethal options. That's the kind of a takeaway that I read there in dealing with threats. What training do they get to determine the appropriate use of force?
Border Patrol agents at the Academy receive 132 hours in the use of force options and how to implement them. There's ongoing training quarterly, and that includes firearms, less than lethal devices, and then every agent has the option to get further training, whether it's with tasers or other intermediate impact weapons and less than lethal devices.
Now, Mitra, this report was sparked by a series of deadly force incidents, 19 in 2 years along the border. What would you like to see actually come out of this report in regards to, would you like to see deaths drop? Would you like to see training? All of the above?
All of the above. The report was initiated after 16 congressmen wrote a letter asking for an independent report to be written about the excessive use of force along the border. There's still a lot that we don't know. The report raises more questions than it answers. We'd like to see more best practices integrated into the CBP arsenal, for example, the use of body-worn cameras, so that there are greater tools for accountability and transparency within the agency.
And Sean, what does the Border Patrol Union think about body cameras?
I don't think that's the way to go. If we had vehicle-mounted cameras, that would help. But I think the body-mounted cameras is just another thing that an agent has to be accountable for, another thing that they have to wear out in the field. One of the points I'd like to make is if an agent had to carry every single weapon that we have in our arsenal, they'd never be able to get out to the field. They would just be burdened down with equipment. And then where is border security?
And they're not close to their cars. They're not close to like a police officers.
No, this isn't a police agency where you're working out of your police car 90% of your day. Our agents are many miles from their vehicles sometimes. Sometimes they're dropped in by helicopter. So they don't have that ready access to every weapon system. In a perfect world, it would be great that we could use less than lethal systems, but that's just not the case, and it's an imperfect world.
Okay, and Mitra, the ACLU is asking for more transparency and accountability. Specifically, can you name some of the top things you'd like?
Yes, we'd like to know more about the investigations that were undertaken, what the conclusions of those investigations were, why disciplinary actions were or were not taken against the various officers involved with these various use of force incidents. As you said, it's been 19 deaths in 2 years. If any law enforcement agency anywhere else in the country was involved with that kind of statistic, there would be a public outcry. There's just too much that we don't understand, and not enough mechanisms in place for us to hold this very large law enforcement agency accountable.
Okay, and Sean, we don't have a whole lot of time left here, but if you could basically tell us any of the changes that Border Patrol says they're already making because of this report and 2 others. Are there a couple of things that stand out for you?
They haven't implemented these changes yet, and I think they'll be slow to roll out, but any training that makes it safer for our agents, we're in favor of. And we think it is very safe. 21,000 agents, making anywhere from 600,000 to 1.2 million arrests a year, and there's only 19 deaths in 2 years. I think that's a pretty safe border, and we have to remember that the people on the other side, they had a choice, and they chose to assault Border Patrol agents.
Okay, well, I want to let folks know they can see the entire Inspector General's report on kpbs.org. Thank you both so much for the update.
Thank you.
Nearly 8,000 bridges in the U.S. are structurally deficient. AP reporter Matt Friedman has details on a review of national bridge records.
Crossing one of the major gateways to Washington, drivers coming across the Frederick Douglass Bridge are greeted by a sweeping view of the U.S. Capitol. But the view underneath is far from idyllic. The aging 63-year-old bridge squeaks, creaks, groans, and rumbles with each passing car and truck. The structure is 13 years past its life expectancy.
It makes you a little leery when you're going back and forth across the bridge. And usually what I get is when I'm going across, so you can kind of feel the vehicle kind of swaying from side to side a little bit.
The deadly 2007 collapse of the I-35 West Bridge in Minneapolis and the more recent collapse of the I-5 bridge in Washington state renewed focus on bridge safety. While members of Congress have talked about spending money on new bridges, no action has been taken. In the meantime, the list of structurally deficient bridges in need of critical repairs grows. An AP review found nearly 8,000 bridges in poor or worse condition with no redundant protections if a vital component fails. That includes New York's iconic Brooklyn Bridge, the Stillwater Lift Bridge over the St. Croix River between Minnesota and Wisconsin, the I-5 span over the Lewis River in Oregon, and the bridge in Washington.
When those bridges were built, there was no fatigue design. Fatigue design and bridge design did not really start until about 1970.
Without funds for major replacements, bridge engineers juggle repairs and retrofits.
We are maintaining it continuously. There are some deteriorated parts that we are going to replace. We're monitoring it continuously.
But they insist these bridges are safe to use until they can be replaced by more modern structures. Matt Friedman, Associated Press.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next News Hour. A newsmaker interview with Secretary of Defense Hagel on Syria and the shooting at the Naval Yard. That's Wednesday on the PBS News Hour.
Well, can you feel the change in the air? This weekend marks the official start of fall, and no big weather changes ahead. Morning overcast along the coast, then partial clearing, low 70s through Saturday. Low 80s inland with plenty of sunshine after the morning clouds clear. Sunny in the mountain areas, low 80s, upper 70s by weekend. Slightly cooler, though, for the desert tomorrow, then back above 100 on Friday and Saturday. You can find tonight's stories and download the KPBS app all on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Good night.